guys, welcome to the Sodcast with Wendy Sod, your favorite host of all time. Yeah, I know that's not true, but maybe someday. So let's get into today's case, guys. Today's case is that of the Villisca Axe Murders, which took place in Villisca, Iowa on June 9th in 1912. So if you were to go to Villisca, Iowa today, you would still find the farmhouse standing, and it is a museum today, and you can go there and take tours. It's known to be haunted. You can stay the night if you so choose, and if you're brave enough. I don't know. I like to think that I am, but I don't know. Might be fun. Anyway, so that's just interesting. They have a big, nice sign out front. It's called the Axe Murders. And I don't know if you've ever been there. Comment below. I want to hear about it. I want to hear if you have any ghosty stories. I love hearing about that stuff. So let's get into the murders. So the murders, like I said, took place on June 9th, 1912. Killed in these murders was the Moore family, 6 members of the Moore family being Josiah the father, Sarah the mother, Herman 11, Catherine 10, Boyd 7, and Paul 5. And then 2 of the Moore's children's friends that spent the night that night, which was Ina 8 and Lena 12 Stillinger. So let's get into the incident. So on that evening, Sarah had coordinated a program at the church, at the Presbyterian church, and it was called the Children's Day Program. So her and the family all went and participated in the activities there at the church, and along with them was the 2 Stillinger children. And the Moore kids asked if Lena and Ina could come spend the night, which Sarah was fine with, so she agreed. And the program at the church ended approximately 9:30 that evening. And so they headed back to the Moore family home and arrived home between 9:45 and 10 p.m. So all was good until 7 a.m. Well, all was not good. That's not a good thing to say, because it wasn't good, but it appeared to be good. There was no red flags, let's just say that, thrown up at that time, until 7 a.m. the next morning, when the neighbor lady comes outside, and I guess she's maybe a little bit of a nosy Nelly, and she's like, well, the Moores aren't out doing their chores yet, and, you know, it's very unusual. They're always up and about this time of the morning. You know, they got a farm, and, you know, typically back then, all the kids would get out of bed, and they would go do their chores in the morning. So she just found this a little unusual. So she went over and she knocked on the door, and she did not get any response. So she tried the doorknob, and it was locked. So she just went ahead and she let the chickens out of the coop for them, and she thought, I'm going to go back to the house and, you know, finish up my chores. So she keeps an eye on the house, and she notices, you know, after some time had went by, that there was still no movement over at the house. So she calls Josiah's brother, Ross, and just to let him know that maybe he should go check on them, that they hadn't been out to do their chores yet. So Ross comes by the house, and he does the same as the neighbor lady did, and, you know, he knocks on the door with no response, tries the doorknob, it's locked. He tries to peer through a window, and it's obstructed by something, a curtain, whatever, he can't see in. So he remembers that he has a spare key to the house. So he goes ahead and he unlocks the door, and he starts to enter, and the neighbor lady stays out on the porch. She does not enter the home. So he goes in, and he walks through the parlor and approaches the first bedroom. Now, when he goes in there, he finds the 2 Stillinger sisters deceased in the bed. And at the foot of the bed was an oil lamp that appeared that it had been placed there, and it wasn't lit. The wick was turned back, but it was just something that stood out. And the girls' faces were covered with pieces of clothing. And then one of the girls, their nightgown was lifted up, and there was a little bit of blood on one of her knees. So he freaks out. He goes running out. They make a call to Henry Horton, who is what they called the peace officer at the time, or the town sheriff. And he comes out, and I think he arrives maybe 5 minutes later, and he goes into the house, and he comes back out sometime later, and he said there's dead bodies in every single bed. So what he finds is, he first finds the Stillinger sisters bludgeoned to death in the first bedroom. And in that bedroom, not only did he notice the oil lamp, but leaning against the wall was a partially cleaned off axe. And next to that axe was another peculiar item. Laid next to the axe was a slab of raw bacon. They're kind of baffled by this. So am I. I don't understand the meaning of it. If you have any ideas of what this symbolizes, let me know down below, because I'm curious about the bacon. Makes me hungry, but anyway, so he moves along through the house, and he goes into Josiah and Sarah's bedroom. And in there he finds the two of them deceased, bludgeoned, apparently with the axe. In the ceiling of the room, there was gouge marks in the ceiling from the upswing of the axe. And he notices an oil lamp also placed at the foot of the bed, not burning, with the wick turned back. Their faces also had been covered up. So he moves along to the next bedrooms, and in every room he finds the remaining 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, all bludgeoned to death in their beds. In the same state, all faces had been covered. Something else that they find very odd in the house is that all of the windows, the door entry windows had been covered with clothing or bed sheets. All of the mirrors in the house had been covered. Just an odd thing. In the kitchen, they find a prepared plate of food that was uneaten, untouched, and then next to that, a bowl of bloody water that they suspect that maybe the killer had washed off his hands in that bowl. Also, they find in the attic, they find 2 cigarette butts, and they kind of surmise that maybe the killer had entered the home earlier in the evening and was lying in wait in the attic, and these were his cigarette butts due to the family not smoking. So they thought that maybe he waited up there until they came home and they all went to bed, and then that's when he attacked. Now, during the autopsy, I stated that the one little girl, the Stillinger girl, her nightgown had been pulled up and she was exposed, but they determined that she had not been sexually abused. They said that each family member was bludgeoned at least 30 times each with the end of the axe, like I think the handle or the backside of the axe. Just horrific, brutal crime, you guys. I can't even imagine. So the neighbors, obviously, they reported not hearing anything, not seeing anything out of the ordinary. Nothing drew up any red flags until that next morning when they didn't come out to do their chores. So let's move along to some of these suspects because there's a lot. And if you're not familiar with these murders, like I said, it took place in 1912. We're talking 100 years later. These murders are not solved, technically. I'll tell you why I say that later. But our first suspect in the case is, he was the number one suspect in the beginning, Reverend Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly. Yeah. That name. So he was known to be an odd character. So he was known to be sexually deviant, had mental issues. He's got quite a long history of these mental issues. He was also left-handed, which they believe that the murderer was. He had come into town and shortly before these murders took place, which they think they took place between 12 at night and 5 in the morning. So he had recently come into town. I believe he attended church, and then that morning of the murders, he left town on a train. Now, allegedly, he told other passengers on this train that there were 8 dead souls in Villisca who were bludgeoned in their beds. Now, this is important because he allegedly makes this statement before the bodies were even discovered. So they immediately, when they hear this, they bring him in, and he decides to make a confession. So he writes up this rambling confession, and he makes the statement to them that God spoke to him and whispered, suffer thy children to come unto me. I don't know what that means, but that's what he says, that God spoke to him. And so he confesses to the whole thing. Okay, so he goes to trial the first time around on September 26th, 1912, my birthday. Not 1912, but September 26th. And he totally recants his confession. Takes everything back. It's like, I made that shit up, whatever. So he is acquitted. So he goes to trial a second time. And this is in November of 1912. And same thing happens. He denies it all. He says he just confessed because that's what they wanted to hear. And so he is acquitted in November a second time. Okay, so they kind of just, start looking at other avenues. And so they're looking at some other suspects. And the second suspect I'm going to talk about is Frank Jones. Now, Frank Jones, also known as Senator Frank Jones, had some beef with Mr. Moore. They, I think, were kind of competitors in the business world. There was rumors going around that Josiah Moore was having an affair with Frank Jones' daughter-in-law. Now, I don't know that this was ever proven or not, but that was, caused some bad blood between the families. So that was suspect number 2. Suspect number 3 I'm going to talk about is William Blackie Mansfield. Now, the theory is that Senator Jones hired William Blackie Mansfield to murder the family because of their beef they had. So he didn't have blood on his hands. So that is a theory there. And he was a suspected serial killer. Months prior to this, he was suspected of committing some crimes. I believe he killed his wife, infant child, and his in-laws. And used an axe. That was like the weapon of choice back in the 1900s, I guess. I don't know. Scary shit. So that was the third suspect. fourth suspect I'm going to talk about is Henry Lee Moore. Not connected to the Moore family, no relation. Months after the murders of the Moore family, he murdered his mom and his grandmother with an axe. And so anybody who had an axe was just a suspect, I guess, because, you know, what the hell? Everybody's using these axes. So he was suspect number 4. Suspect number 5 I'm going to talk about is Paul Mueller. Now, Paul Mueller, in my opinion, is the best suspect they have. And there is a book out there by Bill James and Rachel McCarthy James. I believe father-daughter duo wrote this book together. And they believe that they solved the Villisca murders. And they think that because they think Paul Mueller is the one that did it. And they have literally done, now I didn't read the book, it's called The Man from the Train. I did not read the book, but I read a lot of their research, and they literally have researched this more than anyone, in and out. And so Paul Mueller was a suspected serial killer, who the first murders that he was tied to was a family in Massachusetts that he murdered with an axe, and he took out the whole family. And so when they were doing their research on him and started connecting the dots of where Mueller had been, and he would ride this train, and these murders were all lining up with, you know, where he had been. It was families, not individual people, it was families murdered by axes along this route that he took. And it was all over the United States. And they claim in their book that he's possibly connected to 40 to 100 murders, and, you know, over between the 1800s and 1900s. And the evidence, it makes so much sense. It really does. It's so interesting to read all the research that they have on this. And so, you know, who knows? The sad thing is that it happened in 1912. And so, I don't know how old Paul Mueller was at the time, but I would imagine he's dead by now. And if he's not dead, he's really freaking old, and he's probably, like, in a nursing home. I've probably taken care of him at my nursing home, for all I know. But there's not going to be any justice for this family or these 2 Stillinger sisters. But it would be nice to kind of solve it to the best that we can. And I think this is the closest that we're going to get is this book and this research that Mr. James and Rachel James did on these murders. And if you guys get a chance, if you don't read the book, at least look up some of their research. It's really interesting stuff to read. And that is all I have for you guys. Oh, one more thing. Another connection that Paul and his murders had to the Villisca murders was that he also covered up, like, their faces with clothing, and he did the oil lamp thing. The oil lamps were found at these murders. So there's that. So, yeah. Pretty freaking awesome. Or not awesome, but I don't know. Cool. So, that is all I have on this case, you guys. And please, if you have been to the Axe Murder house, tell me about it. I'm dying to hear some stories. I want to hear your ghost stories. I want to hear any theories you have. I know this story, I kind of crunched it all into 20 minutes, and there's, you know, so much information out there of a million different suspects. But I just wanted to kind of condense it down for you and give you a quick overview. That is my thoughts on the whole thing, and please let me know yours. And I hope to see you guys on my next video. And that is it, guys. Have a good night. Bye.